My best friend used her illness to steal my boyfriend and still expected my compassion. My phone started vibrating while I was standing in the frozen food aisle trying to decide whether buying the cheap waffles counted as giving up on adulthood, and that was honestly a pretty normal way for things to go with her. She never just texted hello. She dropped things into my day like little emotional grenades and then acted confused when people bled. That message was a picture of a white dress on a hanger with the caption, "Too much?" And for a second I actually smiled because it looked like one of her usual spirals about some fundraiser or themed dinner or weird life is short, wear silk phase she was always going through. Then I noticed the date at the top of the screenshot. It was the date of my anniversary. 10 years. 10 whole years with the man I had built my adult life around, and he had texted me that morning saying he had to leave town for a last-minute work emergency. I stood there holding a box of waffles like an idiot, while my brain did that thing where it refuses to catch up, because catching up would ruin your whole afternoon. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe she was asking for an opinion before buying it online. Maybe she was making a joke. Maybe he really was out of town and I was just turning into one of those suspicious women who read too much into timing. I wish I could say my instincts kicked in and saved me right there. They did not. My instincts, historically, had terrible taste in men and way too much patience for women who confused cruelty with honesty. Her next message came almost immediately. "Wrong person? Sorry?" Then she unsent the picture. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not because a white dress automatically means anything, but because people only send "wrong person" that fast when they know exactly what they just exposed. I stared at our thread and felt my face go hot in the middle of the grocery store. I even laughed once under my breath, which made a guy reaching for frozen pizza glance at me like I was having a private breakdown next to the peas. Fair. By the time I got back to the apartment, the flowers he had ordered were waiting outside my door, with a little card that said, "Rain check. I owe you big." He had signed it the way he always did, with the nickname he'd used for me since we were 22, a shortened version of Coralie, the same nickname his mother had adopted, the same nickname that made me feel claimed and comforted at the same time. The flowers were expensive. Tall stems, pale petals, the kind of arrangement that looked better suited for an apology than a celebration. I set them on the counter and just stared at them while the apartment hummed around me. 2 days later, I left them outside a neighbor's door with a note that just said, "Free flowers." I couldn't stand looking at them anymore. Here's the part that matters because otherwise none of this makes sense. I did not just date him. I was folded into his family so young and so deeply that sometimes even I forgot where my life ended and theirs began. When I was 8, I got sick. Not movie sick. Not one dramatic hospital montage and then everybody hugs. It was years of specialists, long drives, emergency overnight bags. Adults speaking in low voices outside doors they thought I couldn't hear. My parents lived out west, and the best treatment I needed was on the other side of the country. His family knew my grandfather from church, and they had connections, space, money, a house close to the hospital, and the kind of steady, practical kindness that makes you trust people forever. I spent months at a time with them, then school years, then summers split between states. His mother learned exactly how I liked toast when I couldn't keep much down. His father sat with me doing math flashcards in waiting rooms. His grandfather told me stories like pain was just weather and not destiny. I grew up half in one home and half in another, which sounds charming until you realize it also means 2 places can break your heart at once. He was never my childhood sweetheart in a creepy little promise way. We were just there, circling each other through years of awkwardness and braces and college and grief and grown-up jobs. When we finally got together, it felt almost embarrassingly inevitable. Everyone acted like they'd been waiting for us to get it over with. His mother cried. My aunt cried. His grandfather said, "Well, took you both long enough." And that was the family version of a standing ovation. Then there was my best friend, the one with the dress photo. We met in our late teens when I was trying hard to become the kind of woman who looked uncomplicated from the outside. She was magnetic in a very polished, exhausting way. The kind of woman who always had perfect hair even when it was raining and made little comments that sounded helpful until you played them back later and realized they were all tiny stabs. She had a talent for finding the sore spot and pressing on it like she was checking for tenderness. My clothes, my posture, my apartment, my job, the way I laughed too loud when I got nervous, the fact that I still cried during hospital scenes in movies because apparently my body loved humiliating me in surround sound. Still, she was there through a lot. Through breakups before him, through my bad apartment with the leaking ceiling, through my aunt's surgery, through the long middle years when everyone else got married or moved away or turned into people who meant to call. So I kept explaining her to myself. She's blunt. She's insecure. She doesn't mean it like that. I was loyal in that self-destructive way women are taught to call maturity. A few months before the anniversary, she got diagnosed. Terminal, aggressive, not much time. Everything around her immediately shifted into that weird emergency softness people adopt when death enters the room. Rudeness became honesty. Demands became needs. Manipulation became fear. She cried, and everybody rushed closer. She wanted company, and people canceled plans. She wanted distraction, and dinner tables rearranged themselves. I'm not proud of this, but part of me felt guilty for the part of me that was tired. Suddenly, no one was allowed to question her behavior, including me. He started disappearing more around then, not in a ridiculous lipstick on the collar way, in a compassionate, socially approved way. She had an appointment and was scared. She needed help organizing paperwork. She didn't want to be alone after hearing bad news. Her apartment felt depressing. Could he bring soup? Could he sit with her? Could he drive her because she was too exhausted? Every single reason sounded like something a decent person would say yes to, and he had always been the decent one between us. He was dependable, patient, the kind of man who remembered other people's allergies and called his grandfather every Sunday. So every time irritation rose in me, I swallowed it like poison and told myself to be better. That night, I heated up leftover pasta, sat on the kitchen floor with the flowers still glaring at me from the counter, and told myself I was not going to become the woman who made another woman's illness about herself. That lasted until almost midnight, when my phone lit up again and she sent me a photo she definitely did not mean for me to see. This one stayed on the screen long enough to ruin my life. He was in it. Not blurry in the background. Not maybe him if I squinted. Him. His hand on her shoulder like it belonged there. Her face turned toward him with that bright, satisfied smile I had seen after every small victory she'd ever collected. There were candles behind them. Glasses on a table. She was wearing that white dress. He wasn't in work clothes. He looked happy. Not burdened. Not tired. Happy. Then she unsent that one too. I called him immediately, which I know is not strategic, but I was never one of those women who could go organize evidence in neat little folders while my heart was falling through the floor. He didn't answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I called her. Nothing. I sat there on my kitchen floor with my thumb hovering over the screen like maybe a third call would magically produce honesty, and the dumbest thought in my head was not they're having an affair. It was this is real. That's the thing I hate most, even more than betrayal. The public part. The humiliation. The idea that this had been happening right in front of me while I kept smiling. He came home the next morning around 8 carrying coffee and a boxed watch like he was starring in a commercial for men who think money is a personality trait. He looked wrecked enough to be convincing if I hadn't already seen the picture. His hair was messy. His shirt was wrinkled. His voice soft. He kissed my forehead and said, "I'm sorry, baby. It turned into a nightmare. I wish I had thrown the coffee in his face." I did not. I stood there in old sweatpants and let him hand me a cup like a hostess accepting a gift from a guest she secretly hates. "What nightmare?" I asked. He started talking fast, not exactly lying, which in some ways made it worse. She'd had a bad night. She spiraled. She didn't want to be alone. Her pain was out of control. There were calls, panic, a visit from a nurse, a lot of tears. He said her name over and over like repetition itself should grant her innocence and him sainthood. He put the watch box on the table and pushed it toward me. I know this is awful timing. I know I messed up. I opened it because at that point my dignity had apparently left the building. It was beautiful, expensive, and almost identical to one she'd shown me months earlier. She'd claimed some mystery man bought it for her, but then refused to say who, which I'd taken at the time as one of her usual little dramas. I closed the box and slid it back across the table. "Give it to her," I said, since it was clearly meant for her anyway. I asked him where he was at 10:32 the night before. He blinked. "What?" "10:32, I said. "Where were you?" He went still in a way that told me everything before he answered. "With her? Celebrating what?" His face did something complicated then. Not panic, exactly. More like irritation that I was forcing the conversation too early, before he'd decided which version I deserved. "It wasn't like that." I laughed. I couldn't help it. That's the sentence men say right before it is exactly like that. He sat down at the table and dragged both hands over his face. He looked exhausted and guilty and sincere, which is a terrible combination because it makes you want to rescue the very person wrecking you. She wanted one normal night, he said. No hospitals, no appointments, no crying. Just one night where she got to feel like herself. And the white dress? He stared at me. "I saw the picture," I said. "Actually, I saw two." That was when he really looked afraid. Not because he had betrayed me, because he'd been caught too soon to prepare a better story. He started with half-truths. They had dinner. She wanted to dress up. She'd been talking about all the things she'd never get to do. He'd tried to cheer her up. She'd had too much wine. It got emotional. She'd said dramatic things. He was just trying to keep her calm. "Did you sleep with her?" I asked. He didn't answer quickly enough. That was it. That was the moment the room changed shape. You can survive a lot when everything is still vague. Once it becomes concrete, your body knows before your mind does. My hands started shaking so hard I had to put them against the counter. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear somebody outside dragging a trash bin down the hall. It was the most ordinary morning in the world, which felt offensive. He stood and came toward me, and I backed up so fast I hit the oven handle. He stopped. It happened once. I said, "You really picked our anniversary for that?" His whole face twisted. It wasn't planned. Men really do say the stupidest things with full confidence. Not planned. As if betrayal only counts if it comes with a calendar invite. Then he did what I now think he had been preparing himself to do for weeks. He started crying about her. Not us. Her. Her fear, her grief, her body failing her, how unfair it all was, how she was running out of time. He talked about the cruelty of watching someone so alive get handed an ending she didn't deserve. He talked about compassion, about being there for someone, about not abandoning a person when they were falling apart. And the whole time I stood there waiting for him to mention me, our decade together, the apartment, the future we had discussed in such boring adult detail that it should have been safe. Mortgage talk, holiday schedules, which of us would switch insurance if we ever got married, the deeply unsexy architecture of real commitment. He barely touched any of it. I asked him if he loved her. He said, "That's not the point," which for the record is a yes dressed up in cowardice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I wish I could say I handled it with dignity, but what I actually did was much stranger. I started asking practical questions like my brain had shoved itself into office mode to avoid collapsing. How long? Who knew? Was his family involved? Had she been in our apartment? Had he used our money on her? Did he think he was still sleeping in my bed that night? He answered some of it, dodged some of it, got offended by some of it. Apparently betrayal has layers, and one of them is wounded pride when the person you betrayed asks about the electric bill. His family did not know, he said. That was the first thing that sounded true. If his mother had known, she would have called me by then, either to defend him or to cry, and since neither had happened, I believed him. His grandfather definitely did not know. That mattered more than I want to admit. Disappointing that man felt almost physically impossible, like cursing in church. When I finally told him to get out, he looked confused. Not resistant. Confused. Like he thought maybe we were still in the talking phase of an argument and not at the end of a life. She doesn't have much time, he said quietly. I remember staring at him and thinking, and apparently I'm supposed to spend mine being humiliated. He left around noon with an overnight bag and that careful, guilty expression men wear when they want credit for not yelling back. I locked the door, turned off my phone, sat on the bathroom floor, and cried so hard I threw up. Then I cleaned the toilet, because that is what adulthood mostly is. Devastation and chores. I called in sick to work with some fake story about food poisoning, which felt technically true. By evening, I had done the thing everybody says not to do, and gone back through months of messages. Mine with him. Mine with her. Tiny weird overlaps started glowing. Times he canceled and she went silent. Little mentions of rides, errands, doctor visits, late-night check-ins. The kind of thing you don't question when everybody's hiding behind a tragedy. It was all there. I just had not wanted to see it. She texted at 9. "Please don't hate me." I stared at that sentence for a full minute, then threw my phone across the couch. Hate is actually too neat a word for what I felt. The next 3 days were a blur of not sleeping, fake working from home, and moving around my own apartment like it belonged to a woman whose life I'd read about online. He called from different numbers after I blocked his. I blocked those too. She left 2 voice notes I never opened because I knew if I heard her cry, I might start apologizing to the person helping burn my house down. That is one of my least favorite things about myself, by the way. My reflex to comfort. Even when I'm the one bleeding. His mother called on the second day, cheerful at first, asking if we were still coming for dinner that weekend, because his grandfather had been craving the peach pie I usually brought. I nearly dropped the phone. For a second, I considered saying yes, showing up and detonating the whole table. But then her voice softened in that way older women get when they can tell you're not breathing right, and she asked if I was okay. I heard myself say I'd had a rough week. She asked if he and I were fighting. I said something like that. She asked if she should worry. I said no, which was a lie so big it practically needed its own chair. I could not tell them over the phone. Not his mother, not his father, and definitely not his grandfather. They had loved me long before he did, and the idea of explaining their son and grandson to them in one awful conversation made me feel sick. Also, and this is embarrassing, I did not want to say it out loud until I knew what I was doing next. Saying a thing makes it real. It gives it a body. I was still trying to keep it vapor. So I decided I was leaving. Not because I'm dramatic. Because once the shock settled, I looked around that apartment and realized every corner had both of us in it. The crooked shelf we fought about. The dent in the hallway wall from the day we tried to move the couch ourselves because we were too cheap to hire help. The stupid mug with a chip on the handle that he refused to throw out. I could not heal in a museum of bad judgment. My aunt still lived back west in the town I grew up in. In the little house with the sloped driveway and the rose bushes she kept threatening to rip out every year and never did. She had been asking me to come home more often for years. She had a spare room she still called mine. She sent me pictures of the county fair every summer like I was in exile instead of living across the country on purpose. I called her that night. She answered on the second ring and said, "What happened?" Not hello. Not how are you, just what happened, because she knows my voice the way some people know weather. I cried again, which was humiliating because I hate crying into phones, but she let me get through the ugly half sentences. I did not tell her every detail. I just said he'd betrayed me, it was bad, and I didn't think I could stay there. She said very calmly, "Come home." Then after a pause, "We'll figure out the rest when you get here." That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me furious because I had spent 10 years building a life somewhere else, and now, "come home" made it sound like all of that could be folded up into boxes and shoved into a trunk. I snapped at her. I said I wasn't a teenager running back after a breakup. She listened, let me burn off my shame, then said, "No, honey, you're a grown woman who doesn't need to sit in the middle of her own humiliation out of pride." I booked a flight 2 weeks out before I could change my mind. Then I did something I didn't fully understand until later. I went to his family's house with a bag of gifts I had bought for absolutely no reason other than panic. Fancy tea for his mother, a baseball cap for his father, sugar-free candies for his grandfather, because apparently my trauma response includes weird hostess behavior. I told myself I was going there to say goodbye before I moved. In reality, I think I wanted to see if the house still felt like mine in any small way. I wanted one thing in my life to remain familiar. His mother answered the door and immediately pulled me into a hug so warm I almost lost it on the porch. She smelled like vanilla and laundry detergent and the exact years of my childhood that had taught me not all adults leave you alone in scary places. His father was in the den watching a game with the sound too loud. His grandfather was at the table doing a crossword with reading glasses perched on his nose. The whole scene was so painfully normal that for 10 minutes I forgot I was there to break with them too. I said I was thinking of moving back west for a while. His mother looked concerned, then excited in that fake positive way people get when they're trying not to pry. His father immediately asked if their son had done something stupid, which nearly took me out because yes, obviously, but also I had not prepared for direct hits. I laughed it off and said I just missed my aunt. His grandfather watched me over the top of his glasses with that quiet, unnerving perception he had always had. He didn't call me a liar. He just said, "Sometimes home starts pulling on you when something is wrong." Then the front door opened behind me. He walked in carrying a paper bag of takeout, clearly not expecting anyone to be there beyond his parents. When he saw me, he stopped cold in the doorway. Then he recovered, because men like him always recover just enough to make you doubt yourself. His mother stood from the table. His father turned from the den. His grandfather didn't move, just watched over his glasses. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between all of us. His father said quietly, "You tell us." The bag in his hands crinkled as he set it on the entry table. He looked at me, then at his mother, and realized this was not a friendly family dinner. She knows," his mother said, and her voice cracked on the word. That's when his face changed. Not panic exactly. More like recognition that the story he'd been managing had gotten away from him. He took a step toward me. I didn't move. His grandfather said his name once, low and sharp, and he stopped. What followed was real. Messy, overlapping, humiliating. His father asking if he had lost his mind. His mother crying and asking why he would do this to me, to them, to himself. Him trying to explain it with calm phrases about compassion and responsibility. At one point, his father said, "Then you help her. You don't sleep with her." Which, thank you, exactly. His mother asked if she had been coming into the house before that week. He hesitated. That was all the answer anyone needed. I felt something collapse in me then. Not new pain, just the final settling of old doubt. "She was here?" his mother asked, her voice rising. "In my house?" He tried to frame it gently. She'd needed help after an appointment and hadn't wanted to be alone. His mother's face went pale, then red. She'd brought her soup once, she said. She'd been kind. She'd thought she was helping. And the whole time, she couldn't finish the sentence. I stayed maybe 12 minutes after that. Long enough to hand over my gifts and watch the family I loved realize they were inside it too. When I stood to leave, his mother asked if I was sure I couldn't stay for dinner. I said no. He took one step after me toward the porch, and I turned so sharply he stopped. I told him not to follow me. He nodded like he was respecting a request instead of standing inside the wreckage he caused. I got in my car, gripped the steering wheel, and laughed that horrible little laugh again. Even my safest place had turned into one more room where the truth could corner me. That night, I did not go home. I drove around until it got dark and my gas light came on, then pulled into a neighborhood bar I had passed 100 times and never entered because it looked like the kind of place where people still knew one another's divorces in detail, which, to be fair, was exactly the energy I needed. Not glamorous, not loud, just dim lighting, old wood, a tired bartender, and enough anonymity to let a grown woman fall apart without a soundtrack. I ordered bourbon even though I don't actually like bourbon. It felt appropriate. Miserable drink for a miserable night. I sat at the far end of the bar and tried to stare at the mirror behind the bottles instead of my own thoughts. That lasted maybe 4 minutes. "You look like you're about to key somebody's car," a man's voice said a few stools down. Normally, I would have ignored that. I'm not a chatty stranger person, but grief and humiliation apparently lower my standards in very specific ways. I looked over. He was somewhere in his 30s. Work boots, decent face, tired eyes, the kind of man who looked like he had done physical labor recently and not for fun. Not slick. Thank God. If he had seemed smooth, I would have told him to go to hell. I don't have the energy, I said. He lifted his glass a little. Fair. That should have been the end of it. Instead, the bartender gave me my drink, I took a sip, made the face of someone who had just swallowed furniture polish, and the man laughed. Not at me. With me. It cracked something open. I ended up telling him more than I should have told anybody. Not every detail, not names, just the shape of it. 10 years. Family tied up in family. Best friend with a terminal diagnosis. Lies hiding under compassion. The anniversary. The picture. The audacity. At one point I said, I know how insane it sounds. And he said, actually, it sounds like exactly the kind of thing people do when they know everyone will be too scared of looking cruel to call them out. Which, frankly, was a sharper read than some of the people who had known me for years. He didn't do that annoying thing men sometimes do where they immediately offer solutions like they're defusing a bomb. He mostly listened, asked the right questions, swore at the right moments, told me I wasn't crazy when I started second-guessing whether illness made the betrayal somehow less real. He said his mother had once stayed with his father after something everyone in town knew was unforgivable because people were going through a lot, and that phrase had ruined half his childhood. I laughed so hard at that I nearly cried again, which was not ideal in public but also not the worst thing I had done that week. He was from my home state, which felt intimate. He was in town for a temporary job overseeing some construction work outside the city, staying in a rental on the other side of downtown. When he asked where I was from and I named my little hometown, he blinked and said he knew the county. Not in a fake small world way. In a real one. He had an uncle nearby. He'd spent summers fishing there as a kid. I know this sounds cheesy, and I hate that for me, but hearing my home spoken back to me in that bar made something in my chest unclench. He gave me his card before he left. First name only, a number, no weird pressure, no call me sometime grin. He just said, if you need help moving boxes or finding a decent place back there, let me know. No pressure. You look like you've got enough of that. Then he paid, nodded at the bartender, and walked out. I kept the card, not because I was flirting, because it felt nice to be handed something without strings attached. I didn't call him right away. But 3 days before my flight west, staring at boxes I couldn't lift by myself, I texted the number. I asked if the offer to help with boxes still stood. He responded in under a minute. When I finally got home, there were 12 missed calls. 9 from him, 3 from her. 1 new message from an unknown number because apparently being blocked inspired creativity. I almost deleted it without reading it, but curiosity remains one of my worst qualities. It was from him. Please let me explain fully before you decide what this is. I stared at that sentence and thought, sir, the problem is not that I lack data. Still, I read the rest. He wrote that she had wanted one last chance to feel chosen, one last chance to feel loved, one last chance to have something beautiful before everything got ugly. He said he knew it was wrong. He said he got caught up in grief, guilt, and pressure. He said he didn't know how to say no to a dying person asking for comfort. He said nothing had changed about how he felt about me. That last sentence was the one that finally made me furious enough to stop crying. Nothing had changed, as if that helped. As if cheating becomes romantic if your emotional baseline stays consistent. I didn't answer. Instead, I packed a suitcase. Not a symbolic one, a real one. Underwear, jeans, toiletries, old college sweatshirt, charger, face wash. I booked a cheap room across town for 3 nights because I could not bear the thought of him showing up with sad eyes and a gentle voice while I stood in my own kitchen trying not to throw knives. I texted my boss that I had a family emergency. Also true, in the broadest possible sense. The hotel room smelled like stale carpet and industrial cleaner. Perfect. No memories. No framed photos of us. No flowers performing innocence on the dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally listened to one of her voice notes. She was crying before she even got to words. Then she said my name the way women do when they want tenderness from someone they've already harmed. She said she never meant for it to happen like this. She said she was scared all the time. She said he had been kind when she needed kindness and things got blurred. She said I was stronger than she was. That line almost made me throw the phone at the wall. I am so tired of women using your strength as an excuse to rob you. As if being harder to kill means I should volunteer my body for the knife. Then she said softly, I think he loves you. I just needed something of my own. Something of my own. Girl, what exactly did you think I was? Store credit? I slept maybe 2 hours that night. The next morning I woke up with that dry, swollen face you get after too much crying and not enough dignity. I showered, got dressed, and decided I was done floating. I was going to tell his family, not all at once. Not in a screaming scene, but soon, because keeping his secret was starting to feel like betrayal of myself. and I had already donated enough of my self-respect to this situation. He got to me before I got to them, which is probably not surprising. Men who live their whole lives being considered dependable are absolute nightmares once they realize they can't manage the story anymore. He showed up in the hotel lobby on the third morning because the front desk clerk, apparently a fan of sad faces, called my room and said, "There's a gentleman down here who says you know him." I very nearly checked out on the spot. I made him sit with me in the lobby instead of letting him upstairs. Public space. Hard chairs. Bright, terrible lighting. I wanted everything about the conversation to be uncomfortable. He looked awful. Real awful. Not manipulative movie awful. Red eyes, stubble, shirt from the day before. A part of me hated that seeing him wrecked still tugged at me. 10 years doesn't just evaporate because somebody behaves like a selfish idiot at the worst possible moment. If it did, leaving would be easy and half the women I know would be a lot happier. He started with, "I know how this looks." And I actually held up my hand and said, "Don't insult me on top of everything else." So at least I had that moment. Then he told me the truth, or at least the version closest to truth he could stand. It had not been one time. Of course it hadn't. It started emotionally first, which is always the phrase people use when they want credit for taking the scenic route to infidelity. She leaned on him more after the diagnosis. He felt responsible. She said I was overwhelmed and distant. She said she didn't want to burden me because I had my own history with hospitals, which was such a twisted use of my life that I nearly stood up and left right then. He said he felt pulled in two directions. Needed by both of us, poor baby. At some point the line moved, then moved again, then disappeared. "How long?" I asked. "A few months." I laughed in his face. "A few months is not an answer." He swallowed. "Since winter." It was late summer. I sat back and just looked at him. Sometimes there's nothing to say because language itself feels too small for the scale of the disrespect. Since winter. Through spring birthdays, family dinners, canceled dates, grocery lists, our lease renewal, my aunt sending us a holiday gift basket addressed to both of us like we were still one unit anyone should invest in. He reached for my hand and I moved it before he got there. "Please," he said. "Please just hear me out." So I did, mostly because I wanted to know how stupid he thought I was. He told me she had become obsessed with the idea that she was going to die without ever being truly loved. He said she talked about regret constantly. About time running out. About being the one left out while I always got the home, the family, the loyalty. Apparently she had spent years quietly keeping score with my life, which did not exactly come as breaking news. He said he thought he could help her without destroying us. Again, poor baby. He really had built himself a whole heroic fantasy where everybody got what they needed and I stayed nicely in place, grateful for scraps and context. When he said, "I never meant to replace you," something cold settled over me. "Replace me?" I repeated. "You thought this was better?" He looked confused, which told me everything. He genuinely believed the offense was about sequencing, about cheating before ending things maybe, about not protecting my feelings enough. He still didn't understand the deeper insult, that he had taken a relationship built over a decade and converted it in his head into something flexible, adjustable, a structure sturdy enough to survive being split down the middle, because he had decided I would tolerate it if he explained it gently enough. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. Not because of sex, not even because of love, because of entitlement. Because he had looked at me and seen a woman so trained by gratitude, history, and family ties that she could be moved to the side and expected to call it maturity. I told him I was leaving the state. His whole body jolted. He asked where. I told him that no longer concerned him. He asked if I was serious. I said, "What part of any of this has felt unserious to you?" Then he said the sentence I think I'll remember when I'm 90. "Can we not make permanent decisions while she's dying? There are people who say rage feels hot. Mine went freezing cold." I looked him dead in the face and said, "Everything you did to me was permanent." I wish I could say he had the decency to shut up after that. He did not. He shifted strategies. Started talking about mercy, about complexity, about how he was not trying to hurt me. He said people do messy things under pressure. True. He said grief makes people reckless. Also true. Then he said maybe, when things calmed down, we could find a way to rebuild because what he had with me was real. Solid. Bigger than one terrible season. One terrible season. That is how men describe the demolition of your trust when they still hope to keep access to your life. I stood up, told him not to contact me again unless it was about logistics. He asked what he should tell his family. I said, "Try the truth. It'll be a new experience." I walked out of the hotel lobby with my hands shaking so badly I couldn't get my car unlocked on the first try. That afternoon, his grandfather called. I almost didn't answer because I had nothing left for anyone, but guilt won. It usually does with older people and me. He asked if I could come by the house before I left town. He said he didn't want details if I wasn't ready, but he had a feeling I was carrying something too heavy by myself. I nearly started sobbing in the pharmacy parking lot. Instead, I said yes. He told me he'd be home the next evening and that if I wanted to talk, he would listen. If I didn't, he'd still make coffee. That old man could have made a cult around emotional restraint and I might have joined. Before I went, I stopped by the apartment for more clothes and found him there packing a duffel bag. He looked startled to see me. I looked at the bag and then at him. Going to her place? He said yes. I don't know why that hit so hard after everything else. Maybe because there is a difference between an affair that exists in secret corners and one that starts using ordinary objects. Socks, chargers, toothbrushes, laundry, betrayal becoming domestic. I felt suddenly ridiculous for every load of towels I had folded while he texted another woman in the bathroom. I took what I needed and left without another word. He called after me once in the hallway. My name. Just my name. Like it still had the power to stop me. It didn't. When I got to his family's house the next evening, his mother opened the door with swollen eyes. That told me two things immediately. 1, he had told them something. 2, whatever version he told had not gone over cleanly. She hugged me so tight it almost hurt and whispered, "I'm sorry," before I had said a word. Not for what, exactly. Not yet. Just sorry. General, horrified, maternal sorry. I held myself together by pure spite. His father was in the kitchen pretending to make coffee he clearly had no intention of drinking. His grandfather was at the table, hands folded, expression steady in that way that somehow felt kinder than pity. No one else was there. Thank God. I could not have handled a full audience. His mother asked if I wanted him gone before we talked. I said yes without hesitation. She nodded and said he wasn't there. Good. 1 point for basic competence. I did not tell the story beautifully. I didn't have some polished speech. I sat at their table and told it in pieces, doubling back, correcting myself, getting angry in the middle of sentences, crying and then being annoyed that I was crying. I told them about the first photo, the second photo, the anniversary, the confession, the hotel, the months of overlap, the way he'd framed it as comfort, the way she'd used her diagnosis as both shield and weapon. I told them I believed he had let her into their house before I knew the full truth, because she had moved through it like someone who'd already practiced. I did not say that to be cruel. I said it because it was true. His father swore under his breath so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. His mother cried quietly, the kind of crying people do when their pain is mixed with shame. His grandfather listened without interrupting once. When I finished, there was a silence so heavy I could hear the old clock in the hall. Then his father said, "He did what?" Not because he hadn't heard me. Because hearing and believing are different tasks. His mother kept shaking her head and saying, "No, no, no," like she was trying to reverse the timeline through denial alone. I felt awful for them, which made me angry at myself all over again, because why was I still the one carrying everybody's emotions? His grandfather looked at me and said very quietly, "You were right not to hold this alone." That was it. No speeches, no excuses for his grandson, just that. His father called him immediately on speaker because subtlety had left the building. I wanted to say no, not like this. But honestly, there was no gentle version left. He answered on the third ring. His father told him to come over. He said he was busy. His father said, "You get here now." Then hung up. We waited. Those 20 minutes were among the worst of my life. Not because I doubted what happened. Because I was sitting in the family that had helped raise me, waiting for their son to walk in and stand inside his own choices while I watched. It felt indecent. Necessary, but indecent. He walked in alone, carrying his phone like he'd been fielding calls. When he saw me sitting at his family's table, his whole face went white. "What's going on?" he asked, but his voice was already preparing for impact. His father stood. His mother's hands were shaking. His grandfather remained perfectly still. "Sit down," his father said. What followed was real. Messy, overlapping, humiliating. His father asking if he had lost his mind. His mother crying and asking why he would do this to me, to them, to himself. Him trying to explain it with calm phrases about compassion and responsibility, as if words could rebuild what he'd broken. At one point his father said, "Then you help her. You don't sleep with her." Which, thank you. Exactly. His mother asked him directly if she had been coming into the house before that week. He hesitated. That was all the answer anyone needed. I felt something collapse in me then. Not new pain, just the final settling of old doubt. I hadn't imagined any of it. He kept trying different versions of the same defense depending on who he was talking to. To me, it had been emotion and confusion. To his mother, it was care. To his father, it was obligation. To his grandfather, weirdly, it became a speech about not turning away from suffering. Every audience got tailored language. That was when I understood he didn't just lie. He curated. He had built a little rotating museum of excuses and invited each of us to stand in front of the one that flattered our values most. His grandfather finally spoke after nearly everyone else had exhausted themselves. He looked at his grandson and said, "If you wanted to help a dying woman, there were 1,000 honorable ways to do it. You chose one that served you." It was the most devastating sentence in the room because it was true, and because it came from the one person he had spent his whole life trying to impress. He tried to protest. His grandfather held up a hand. Enough. Then he turned to me and said, "You do not owe anyone endurance just because they are ashamed now." I wanted to tattoo that on my forehead. I left before the scene was fully over. I could feel everyone starting to turn inward toward family pain, which is natural and also none of my business anymore. His mother followed me to the porch and hugged me again, crying so hard she could barely speak. She said I would always be loved there. I believed her, which somehow made leaving worse. The moving part was uglier than the betrayal in a different way. Dividing 10 years of shared life into yours and mine felt impossible. The couch, the lease, which pans were mine. I hated all of it. He moved out fully by the end of the week. Or rather, he moved to her place. He never said it exactly like that, but I knew. Everybody knew. There's no subtle way to spend every night somewhere else once the whole secret's been kicked into daylight. A mutual acquaintance from his office called me, just checking in, and accidentally confirmed what I had suspected when she mentioned he was taking calls from a balcony because your place must be crowded with everything going on. My place. Cute. I worked from the hotel for a few more days, then from a coffee shop, then finally forced myself back into the apartment because money is real even when your relationship isn't anymore. My boss was surprisingly decent. She didn't ask for details. She just looked at my face on a video call and said, "Take what time you need, but please remember basic hygiene and food are not optional." That level of practical compassion almost made me cry harder than any grand emotional speech could have. My aunt mailed me a box before I even landed out west. Not because she's psychic, because apparently she heard I'm coming home and took that as a project. Inside were old towels, 2 sets of sheets, a little note that said, "For your first nights until you figure out what you want to keep," and a recipe card for the apple pie she has made since I was 6. I stared at that box in my apartment full of half-packed resentment and thought, okay, I'm really doing this. He kept trying to sneak emotion into practical messages. "Do you want the yellow blanket?" would be followed by, "I miss talking to you." Or, "The utility transfer is scheduled for Tuesday," followed by, "I hate that this is happening like this." I finally wrote back, "Stop attaching feelings to bills." Petty? Yes. Effective? Also yes. He stopped for almost 48 hours. Then came the message that made me understand the full scale of his entitlement. It arrived from yet another new number because apparently boundaries to him were like decorative throw pillows. He wrote that once things settled, maybe we could talk about what our relationship looked like going forward, because what he had with her was temporary by circumstance, but what he had with me was foundational. Foundational. I sat there at my desk at work, staring at that word while a spreadsheet glowed on my screen like I was a person with ordinary concerns. I called him immediately, which again was not strategic, but sometimes shock outruns wisdom. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. I said, "Did you just suggest keeping me as what, exactly?" He started with, "That's not what I meant," which is usually how people begin when it is exactly what they meant. Then, unbelievably, he clarified. He said he wasn't asking me to be second best. He said he was asking me to understand that different relationships can hold different needs. He said what he and I built didn't disappear because he had taken on something painful and complicated elsewhere. He said she needed him in a way tied to time, fear, and mortality, but I was his real home. I actually said, "Are you hearing yourself?" He kept going. That's the wild part. He genuinely thought he was presenting nuance. That if he used enough mature-sounding words, I would be flattered by being positioned as the permanent one while he played tragic caretaker to my dying former best friend. He had built an entire emotional duplex in his mind and expected me to compliment the floor plan. I told him very calmly, because calm is scarier than screaming when you mean it, that he had not betrayed me when he slept with her. He betrayed me when he assumed I would accept being rearranged around his guilt. Then I blocked that number too. I spent that night wrapping dishes in newspaper and laughing to myself in this mean little way that probably would have worried a healthier person. Sometimes it's either laugh or smash plates. I needed the plates. His mother called the next morning to ask if she could help me pack. I said no at first. She said she understood. Then she said, "I'm asking for me too." So I let her come over that afternoon. Packing with the mother of the man who blew up your life is bizarre. She folded towels while apologizing in spirals. For him. For not seeing it sooner. For bringing my friend soup once without realizing she was feeding a snake in her own kitchen. I told her she was not responsible for a grown man's moral collapse. She nodded, cried, and apologized again. We are, all of us, annoying in our favorite ways. At one point, she found an old photo of me in high school tucked in a recipe binder on the shelf. I was at their table grinning with braces and an awful cardigan. She touched the edge of the picture and said, "You were ours before you were his." That one got me. His father did not come help pack, which was probably wise for everyone, but he sent over flattened boxes and bubble wrap and a note in his aggressive block handwriting that said, "None of this was your fault." Brutal. Useful. His grandfather called that evening. He asked when I was leaving. I told him the day. He said he wanted to see me before I went, not for another heavy conversation, just to say goodbye properly. I told him yes. My voice cracked a little, and he pretended not to notice, which was exactly why I loved him. The man from the bar texted once during all this. "You still alive over there?" I laughed, which I badly needed. I said barely. He replied, "That counts." No flirting, just presence. The truth about leaving a long relationship is that everybody suddenly becomes obsessed with your healing in ways that are both sincere and deeply annoying. Some people wanted me noble. Some wanted me devastated. Some wanted me wise already, which was insulting because I was still at the stage where I fantasized about mailing her a box full of all the things she had once admired in my life, with a note saying, "Enjoy the leftovers." Work friends I wasn't even close to started sending me articles about moving on. My aunt sent me grocery lists and advice about setting up utilities in a new place. His mother sent me too much food. He sent nothing for 3 blessed days. Then I got a call from a blocked number while I was dragging a box labeled bathroom to the front closet. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded wrecked. More wrecked than before. He said she had a bad appointment. He said things were getting worse faster than anyone expected. He said he wasn't calling to ask for anything, just to say he was sorry for all of it, and that he hoped someday I would understand he hadn't been trying to destroy me. I listened to that message twice because there is something almost fascinating about being talked to by someone who still does not grasp the size of what he's done. Destroy is a dramatic word. He thought if he avoided dramatic language, maybe the damage shrank, as if betrayal is only betrayal when someone intended fireworks. I did not call back. 2 days later, he showed up at the apartment building anyway. The doorman knew him from years of normal life and let him upstairs before checking with me, which I now think should be punishable. I opened the door to take out a trash bag and found him standing there in the hall holding himself like a man arriving at a funeral he caused. I actually said, "You have got to be kidding me." He asked if he could come in. I said no. He said please. I said still no. So we had the conversation right there in the hallway with my neighbors absolutely pretending not to listen from behind their doors. He had heard from his mother that I was leaving soon. He wanted to see me before I went. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do. I said yes. And when his face changed like hope had entered the chat, I said, "Disappear." That part felt amazing, for the record. Then he saw a man's jacket hanging over the chair inside my apartment and his whole tone changed, not because he recognized it. He didn't, because it was not his. The jacket belonged to the man from the bar, who had stopped by that morning to help me carry down 2 heavy boxes because apparently I have a type now and it's practical men who own work boots. Nothing had happened between us. Still, the look on my ex's face when he realized another man had occupied even 1 inch of air near me was so absurd I almost laughed. "Who's here?" he asked. I just stared at him. The audacity was biblical. He asked again, sharper this time, and then said, "You move on fast when you want to." I honestly think my soul left my body for a second. This man had spent months sleeping with my best friend under the soft glow of terminal illness, and now wanted to imply I was morally slippery because someone helped me lift boxes. He had reached a level of delusion that deserved its own museum wing. I said very quietly, "Get out of my hallway." He tried to push past the door. Not violently, just with the entitled forward movement of someone used to access. That was somehow worse. I shoved the door hard and it hit the frame with enough force to make him step back. Then I raised my voice for the first time and said, "Leave." My neighbor across the hall cracked her door open. Bless nosy women everywhere. He looked stunned, not because I yelled, because I rarely did, because some part of him had truly believed proximity still belonged to him. He put his hands up and said he just didn't want me making decisions out of anger. I said, "Every good decision I've made this month was made out of anger." Also true. He left then, finally, with that slow, wounded walk men do when they want everyone in the building to know they are not the aggressor. My neighbor fully stepped into the hallway after the elevator doors closed and asked if I needed her to call someone. I said no, thanked her, and then had to sit on the floor inside my apartment for 10 minutes because adrenaline is rude and uninvited. That night, I told his mother what happened because I was done protecting him from consequences. She went quiet in that dangerous way certain polite women do when they're 1 second from becoming terrifying. She said, "He did what?" I told her. She said she would handle it. I did not ask how. The next day, he sent a single text about the utility account and signed it with my full first name instead of the nickname. That's how I knew he had been scorched somehow. Small mercies. The man from the bar, meanwhile, remained aggressively normal. He helped with boxes, brought me a sandwich once because he said grief makes people forget basic body maintenance, and never once tried to turn decency into a transaction. I told him more of the story one afternoon while we were wrapping dishes in newspaper. He leaned against my counter and said, "So he really thought you'd wait around while he played hospice boyfriend?" I laughed so hard I nearly choked. It was such a terrible phrase and exactly the phrase. I need to be clear. I was not falling in love while my life was on fire. I was surviving. There's a difference. But I also noticed how startling it was to be around a man who did not require me to contort reality to protect his self-image. If he made a bad joke, he admitted it was bad. If he was late, he said why. If he offered help, he meant help. No emotional smoke machine, just a person. That alone felt suspiciously luxurious. The first weeks back were ugly. I worked from my aunt's dining room table, cried in parking lots, and kept waking up before dawn with that horrible jolt, like I had forgotten to prevent some disaster that had already happened. My aunt handled it with coffee, food, blunt observations, and no speeches about growth. She kept saying, eat something, or stop reading old messages, or if you cry on my clean pillowcases again, at least rotate them, which helped more than inspirational nonsense ever could. She also knew when being alone was the worst thing for me. Some mornings she'd knock on my door with coffee and tell me we were going to the hardware store, or the farmer's market, or anywhere that wasn't the four walls I'd been staring at all night. She didn't make me talk. She just made me move. Slowly, that started to feel like living again. The man from the bar stayed exactly what he had promised to be. Present, practical, no pressure. He helped me find a small apartment over a bakery downtown, carried boxes, and never tried to turn my mess into his opportunity. The first time he kissed me, I burst into tears. He didn't flinch. He just said, "Okay, so your nervous system needs a minute." Like that was the most normal thing in the world. My ex kept trying. New numbers, long apologies, messages about how nothing had changed about what I meant to him. He still thought the relationship could survive if he framed his betrayal as tragedy instead of choice. He wrote that what he had with her was tied to fear, illness, and the end of her life. But what he had with me was the real foundation. And once things settled, maybe we could talk about rebuilding. Rebuilding. As if he had misplaced a piece of furniture and not moved in with my best friend after betraying me. I answered once. Just once. I told him he didn't lose me when he chose her. He lost me when he assumed I would still be there after. Then I blocked that number too. She got weaker fast after that, from what I heard. His mother called sometimes, and once in a while news slipped through. Hospital visits, pain, more fear. I never went to see her. I was done being asked to prove I was a good person by standing closer to the people who hurt me. She died. I didn't go to the funeral. I sat in my apartment over the bakery with flower-smelling air drifting up through the floorboards, and felt sadness, anger, relief, and emptiness all at once. Just the end of a person who had known every fragile part of me and still turned my life into a competition she wanted to win. Death did not make her innocent. It also didn't make me feel victorious. It just made everything irreversible. I thought about the version of her I'd met at 19, the one who'd laughed at my jokes and stayed up late talking about futures that felt huge and possible. I wondered when that version started disappearing, or if maybe she'd never really existed at all and I'd just been filling in gaps with hope. I didn't cry for what I lost. I cried for what I'd never actually had. He showed up once after the funeral, full of grief and regret, and this unbelievable hope that now that everything was over, we might somehow find our way back to each other. That phrase alone told me he had still learned nothing. He said he had loved me the whole time. I told him that was not the defense he thought it was, and told him to leave. After that, something in me finally went quiet. I built routines. I let the man from the bar become my boyfriend slowly, in daylight, through dinners and grocery runs and arguments about stupid things that actually got resolved. My aunt approved of him, which she hid badly. His grandfather died not long after, and I cried for him in a way that had nothing to do with scandal and everything to do with gratitude. He was one of the few people who never asked me to make myself smaller so somebody else could feel better. Not that I found some perfect new life. I didn't. I found a real life, better where it matters. I still have nights where a random phrase or a white dress hits me wrong. I still have to remind myself that love is not supposed to feel like being talked out of your own reality, but I know the difference now. And maybe that's enough. I don't think of myself as the woman he left behind, or the woman her dying friend envied, or even the woman who stayed too long inside a story that had already betrayed her. I think of myself as the woman who finally stopped calling endurance loyalty, the woman who left, the woman who went home, unpacked her life piece by piece, and learned that peace can look a lot like a small kitchen, an honest man, a blunt aunt,